I am Maria Santos, 26 years old and a medically discharged Army veteran. 3 months ago, I received a $100,000 life insurance payout from the military after an IED explosion left me with permanent hearing damage and PTSD. I thought this money would finally give me the chance to build something meaningful, a nonprofit to help other veterans transition back to civilian life. I was wrong. Yesterday, my mother called with words that shattered everything. Maria, your sister needs it more. She's getting married and needs a house down payment. You're strong. You'll figure something else out. When I refused, my father got on the line. Then don't bother coming home for Sophia's wedding. You're not family anymore. So here I am, sitting in my tiny San Diego apartment, while my phone buzzes nonstop with missed calls from relatives I barely know, all trying to convince me to do the right thing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for my appointment at the VA hospital. I had been looking forward to this particular session with my therapist, Riley Thompson, because I finally had good news to share. The life insurance check had cleared, and I was ready to start making my dreams a reality. My phone rang at 7:15 a.m., which should have been my first red flag. My mother, Patricia Santos, never called me early unless something was wrong, or unless she needed something. In our family, those two things were often the same thing. "Mija," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of forced sweetness that always preceded a request. "How are you feeling today? Any nightmares last night?" The concern was genuine, but I could hear the underlying agenda. My mother had perfected the art of leading with worry before making her real demands. It was a strategy she'd used my entire life, particularly when it came to getting me to accommodate my younger sister, Sophia. "I'm doing okay, Mom. Actually, having a good day. What's going on?" "Well, that's wonderful to hear, sweetheart. You know your father and I worry about you all the way out there in California, all alone." She paused, and I could practically hear her gathering courage for whatever came next. "I was talking to Sophia yesterday, and she's so stressed about the wedding planning and finding a house with Miguel." Miguel, Sophia's fiancé of 8 months, a perfectly nice guy who worked in marketing for some tech startup in Phoenix. They'd been house hunting for weeks, apparently, frustrated by the competitive market and their limited budget. "That's tough," I said, genuinely sympathetic while applying concealer to the dark circles under my eyes. "The housing market is crazy everywhere right now." It really is. They found this perfect little house in Scottsdale, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, perfect for starting a family, but they need $50,000 for the down payment, and you know how expensive weddings are these days. Another pause. "They're just 2 young kids trying to build their life together." The setup was becoming clear, but I couldn't believe where this was heading. "Mom, are you asking me to—" "The thing is, Mija, I know you got that insurance money from the military. $100,000 is such a blessing, and we're so grateful that you're alive and that they're taking care of you." Her voice took on that tone of maternal authority that brooked no argument. "But Sophia really needs this more than you do right now." I sat down hard on my bed, the concealer brush slipping from my suddenly numb fingers. I stared at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, seeing the scar that ran along my left temple, mostly hidden by my hair, but always there, the hearing aid in my left ear that I'd become expert at concealing, the prescription bottles on my nightstand that helped me sleep without reliving that day in Afghanistan over and over again. "Mom, that money isn't just sitting around. I have plans for it. Important plans." "Plans can change, Maria. Family is forever." I took a deep breath, trying to channel the calm that Riley had been teaching me in our sessions. I'm starting a nonprofit, Mom, to help other veterans transition back to civilian life. This money is my seed funding. It's not just about me, it's about helping other people who are struggling like I did. That's very noble, sweetheart, but Sophia's situation is immediate. She could lose this house. And you know how sensitive she is. She's been crying every night, worried that she won't be able to give Miguel the home he deserves. Sensitive. The word that defined my sister's treatment our entire lives. Sophia was sensitive, so Maria had to share her toys. Sophia was sensitive, so Maria had to give up her spot on family vacations when money was tight. Sophia was sensitive, so Maria had to edit her college essays and help her through every minor crisis while working 2 jobs to pay her own way through school. What about what I deserve, Mom? I served 2 tours. I almost died for this country. This money is compensation for the fact that I'll never hear properly again, that I wake up in cold sweats 3 times a week, and that I can't handle crowds or loud noises without having a panic attack.
Don't be dramatic, Maria. You're doing fine. You have your apartment, your job at the Veterans Center. You're stable. Stable. As if stability was all I was entitled to. As if my dreams and ambitions were luxuries I couldn't afford while my sister deserved everything her heart desired. I'm not giving Sophia my insurance money, I said clearly. The line went quiet for several long seconds. Then I heard muffled voices in the background. My father had arrived for this conversation. Maria? My father's voice came through the phone, stern and authoritative in the way that had intimidated me as a child. Your mother explained the situation. This family sticks together, and right now, your sister needs our support. Dad, this is money I earned through my service and my injury. It's not family money. Everything in this family is family business. You wouldn't be alive to receive that money if we hadn't raised you right, taught you values, supported you through school. The manipulation was textbook, but no less effective for its familiarity. My father, Vincent Santos, had built his auto repair shop from nothing, and he ran our family with the same iron fist he used to manage his employees. Questioning his decisions was tantamount to betrayal. I supported myself through school, Dad. I joined the military partly because I couldn't afford college otherwise, remember? We gave you a roof over your head, food, clothes, love. And this is how you repay us? By abandoning your sister when she needs you most? I could hear Sophia crying in the background, right on cue. The sound that had mobilized armies of family intervention throughout our childhood. The sound that had taught me that my needs would always come second to her emotions. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm using this money for its intended purpose, to build something that helps people. Help people? My father's voice rose. What about helping your own family? What about your sister's happiness? What about mine? The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I had never asked it so directly before, had never demanded that my happiness be weighed equally against Sophia's. Your happiness comes from doing right by your family, my father said finally. If you can't see that, then maybe you need to think about whether you really understand what family means. The threat was implicit but clear. Comply or be cut off. It was the nuclear option he'd used sparingly throughout my childhood, but it had always worked. The fear of being alone, of losing the only connection I had always been enough to bring me back in line. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was a combat veteran who had faced down enemies with AK-47s and improvised explosive devices. I had survived situations that would have broken the old Maria, the people-pleasing daughter who couldn't bear disappointment. I know exactly what family means, I said quietly. It means supporting each other, not just supporting Sophia. It means respecting each other's choices, not just demanding sacrifice from the same person over and over. Maria Santos, if you choose money over family, then you're not the daughter we raised, and you're not welcome at Sophia's wedding." The line went dead. I sat in the sudden silence of my apartment, holding the phone with a trembling hand. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of San Diego morning traffic. People starting their days, going to jobs, living their lives. Everything seemed impossibly normal while my world had just exploded for the second time in 2 years. The first explosion had taken my hearing and my sense of security. This one had taken my family. My phone immediately started buzzing with text messages. Sophia, of course, but also my Aunt Rosa, my cousin Elena, even my grandmother's neighbor who apparently had been enlisted in the campaign to change my mind. I turned the phone off and sat in the growing daylight, trying to process what just happened. In the space of 20 minutes, my family had reduced my military service, my injury, my trauma, and my dreams into obstacles standing in the way of Sophia's perfect wedding and perfect house. They had made it clear that my value in the family was measured entirely by my usefulness to them, particularly to my sister. And when I had finally said no, when I had finally prioritized my own needs, I had been immediately threatened with exile. The worst part was how familiar it all felt, how easily I could trace this pattern back through every major decision in our family, every time resources were at tension or sacrifice had been needed, and how consistently the expectation had fallen on me to provide, while Sophia received. But I wasn't the same person who had enlisted 6 years ago, desperate to prove herself and escape a family dynamic that suffocated her dreams. I had been forged in the crucible of military service and trauma. I had learned to make life or death decisions under pressure. I had learned that survival sometimes meant making choices that other people wouldn't understand. This was one of those times. I picked up my car keys, grabbed my appointment confirmation, and headed to the VA hospital. I had promised Riley I would share my good news about the insurance money and my nonprofit plans. What I hadn't expected was that I'd also be sharing the news that I had finally done what I had been too scared to do my entire life. I had chosen myself.
My story really begins long before that devastating phone call. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, where the summer heat could kill you and family loyalty was supposed to be everything. Our house on Cactus Road was small but well-maintained, painted desert beige, with a front yard full of gravel and stubborn desert plants that somehow survived despite the brutal climate. My father, Vincent Santos, built Santos Auto Repair from nothing but determination and an old garage he rented when I was 5 years old. He was the kind of man who believed that hard work could overcome any obstacle and that respect was earned through sacrifice and unwavering dedication to family. Every decision in our household went through him, from what we ate for dinner to which high school I would attend. "In this family, we stick together," was his constant refrain, usually delivered while he cleaned motor oil from his hands at the kitchen sink. "The world will try to tear us apart, but family is all we really have." My mother, Patricia, had been a teacher before I was born, but she gave up her career to support Dad's business and raise his children. She kept the books for the auto shop, managed the household, and served as the emotional thermostat for our family, constantly adjusting the temperature to keep everyone comfortable, which usually meant keeping Dad calm and Sophia happy. Mom had a gift for smoothing over conflicts without actually resolving them. When Dad's temper flared, she would redirect his attention. When Sophia cried, she would mobilize the entire family to fix whatever was wrong. But when I had problems, she would offer practical advice, delivered with a pat on the head. "You're strong, mija. You'll figure it out." Then there was Sophia, born 3 years after me during one of Arizona's worst heat waves. From the moment she arrived, pink and screaming and absolutely furious at the world, the family dynamic shifted like tectonic plates. Suddenly, there was a princess in our working-class castle, and everyone else became supporting cast in the story of her happiness. I don't resent Sophia for being loved. What child wouldn't want to be the center of their parents' universe? But the stark difference in how we were treated created a chasm that grew wider with each passing year. When I was 8 and Sophia was 5, I wanted to take piano lessons. Mrs. Rodriguez down the street offered them for $20 a week, and I had even found an old keyboard at a yard sale for $50. Music lessons are a luxury we can't afford right now, Dad said, not looking up from his newspaper. Maybe when business picks up. 2 weeks later, Sophia saw a commercial for a dance class and started spinning around the living room declaring herself a ballerina. By the end of the month, she was enrolled in classes at Miss Angela's dance studio, complete with pink leotards, ballet shoes, and a tutu that cost more than the keyboard that I had wanted. Dance is different, Mom explained when I asked about the fairness of it all. Sophia has natural talent and she's so passionate about it. You understand, right, Maria? You're practical like that. Practical. The word that would define my childhood and adolescence. Maria is practical, so she doesn't need the pretty dress for the school dance. Maria is practical, so she can share a room with her sister who needs the bigger space for all her dance costumes and trophies. Maria is practical, so she can babysit Sophia while Mom and Dad work late at the shop. The pattern became so ingrained that I started to believe it myself. I was the responsible one, the one who could handle disappointment and hardship. Sophia was delicate, artistic, someone who needed protection and nurturing to flourish. When I turned 16, I wanted to get my driver's license and maybe have access to the family's old Toyota for school and work. Insurance is expensive for teenage drivers, Dad said. You can walk to school. It's good exercise. When Sophia turned 16, 3 years later, she found a cute Volkswagen Beetle at a dealership and fell in love with it. Dad co-signed the loan and paid the insurance without a single complaint. Every girl deserves to feel special on her 16th birthday, he said, hugging her while she cried happy tears. The academic expectations were just as skewed. I maintained a 3.8 GPA throughout high school while working 20 hours a week at a local grocery store to save money for college. My parents attended one parent-teacher conference in 4 years, and when I made the honor roll, they would nod approvingly and remind me that grades were just the foundation. Real success came from hard work after graduation. Sophia struggled with a 2.5 GPA despite having no job and unlimited access to tutoring that I had helped pay for with my grocery store wages. But when she made honor roll for a single semester her junior year, Dad closed the auto shop early and took the whole family out to celebrate at the nicest steakhouse in Phoenix. "We're so proud of you, princess," he said, raising his glass while Sophia beamed. "This proves you can do anything when you put your mind to it." I had put my mind to academic success for years, but this was the first family celebration I could remember that wasn't for a birthday or holiday.
The college planning process revealed the full scope of the inequality. I spent months researching scholarships, filling out financial aid forms, and working extra shifts to save money for application fees. I applied to Arizona State University, where I could live at home and attend at in-state rates, and to several schools with strong programs but significant price tags. When I received a partial scholarship to ASU, my parents were pleased but practical. "It's a good school, and you can keep working at the grocery store," Mom said. Very sensible. Sophia, meanwhile, fell in love with Northern Arizona University during a campus visit that included shopping, dining, and a concert. The school was beautiful, expensive, and offered a dance program that would allow her to explore her artistic side. She was accepted with mediocre grades and no scholarships. "We'll make it work," Dad said when the financial aid package came back offering minimal support. "Sophia deserves the full college experience, and NAU has exactly what she needs." I watched my parents liquidate their modest savings, take out a second mortgage on the house, and even sell Dad's restored 1967 Camaro, his pride and joy, to pay for Sophia's first year at NAU. Meanwhile, I was working 30 hours a week and eating ramen noodles to avoid asking them for textbook money. The final insult came during my sophomore year, when I mentioned that I was considering the Army National Guard to help pay for my remaining tuition. The military would provide education benefits, and I could serve part-time while finishing my degree. Absolutely not, Dad said immediately. Military service is dangerous, and you're needed here to help with Sophia. Help with Sophia meant driving the 3 hours to Flagstaff every few weeks to bring her care packages, helping her with papers via phone and email, and providing emotional support when she struggled with homesickness or boy problems or the basic challenges of adult life. But when Sophia called crying one night because she'd failed a required math class and needed to retake it during expensive summer session, the family mobilized to pay the extra tuition without question. Family helps family, Dad said, echoing the phrase that had justified every sacrifice I'd made and every opportunity I had given up. My part, apparently, was to do well with less while ensuring that Sophia had everything she needed to do well with more. The breaking point came during my junior year, when I finally worked up the courage to ask my parents to co-sign a small loan so I could study abroad for a semester. The program would cost $3,000 after scholarships, and it would give me international experience that could open doors after graduation. "We can't take on any more debt right now," Mom said apologetically. "With Sophia's expenses, money is really tight." I understood. I was disappointed, but I understood. 2 weeks later, Sophia called from college in tears because her sorority was going to Greece for spring break, and she was the only one who couldn't afford to go. The trip cost $2,500. Dad found the money. That night, lying in my narrow bed in the room I still shared with storage boxes and my sister's childhood furniture, I made a decision. I was going to join the military. Not the National Guard, but active duty. I would serve my country, earn my own benefits, and build a life where my worth wasn't measured by how much I was willing to sacrifice for someone else's dreams. I was 20 years old, and I was going to save myself. The recruitment office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a Chinese restaurant, staffed by Sergeant First Class Johnson, a woman who looked at me like she could see straight through my carefully constructed explanations about patriotism and service. She asked me, "What are you really running from?" after I'd finished my prepared speech about wanting to serve my country. I looked around the office at the posters showing soldiers in exotic locations, learning new skills, earning money for education. I thought about my parents' house, where my achievements were footnotes and my needs were afterthoughts. "I'm not running from anything," I said. "I'm running toward something." She nodded slowly, recognizing something familiar in my voice. "A lot of the best soldiers I know started exactly where you are right now." I signed the papers that day, choosing Army medic as my specialty. I would save lives instead of engines, serve something bigger than family politics, and finally be valued for what I could contribute rather than what I could sacrifice. I was 20 years old, and I had finally found my escape route. I drove home that evening with my enlistment papers in my backpack and a strange sense of lightness in my chest. For the first time in my life, I had made a major decision without considering how it would affect Sophia first. That night at dinner, I told my family I had enlisted. The reaction was everything I had expected and dreaded. Dad was furious. "You committed to something this serious without discussing it with your family first?" Mom was worried. "The military is so dangerous, mija. What if something happens to you?" Sophia was confused. "But who's going to help me with my senior project next year?" Nobody asked if it was what I wanted. Nobody congratulated me on my decision to serve. Nobody seemed to consider that this might be the opportunity I needed to build something of my own. But I was past the point of needing their approval. I was 20 years old, and I had finally found my escape route.
Basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma was everything the recruiters had promised and nothing like I expected. The Oklahoma heat was different from Arizona's dry furnace. It was humid, oppressive, and seemed to seep into your bones. But for the first time in my life, I was being challenged based on my own merit, not compared to someone else's needs. Staff Sergeant Williams was a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. She looked at our platoon of new recruits like we were raw materials that might, with enough pressure and heat, be forged into something useful. "Listen up, ladies," she said on our first day, pacing in front of our awkward formation. "I don't care who your daddy is, how much money your family has, or what promises got you here. In my army, you earn everything you get, and you get everything you earn. Fair enough?" It was more than fair. It was revolutionary. For 8 weeks, I was judged entirely on my ability to meet standards that applied equally to everyone. When I excelled at medical training, I was recognized for it. When I struggled with marksmanship, I got extra instruction without anyone suggesting that maybe military service wasn't right for someone like me. When I scored in the top 10% on my final exams, my drill sergeant called me into her office. "Santos, you've got natural leadership ability and good instincts under pressure," she said, reviewing my file. "Ever think about making this a career?" The question caught me off guard. In my family, my future had always been discussed in terms of how I could support others, helping Dad with the business, being available to assist Sophia with her challenges, staying close to home in case Mom needed help. No one had ever asked what I wanted to build for myself. "I haven't thought much past finishing my commitment, Sergeant." "Well, start thinking. The Army invests in people who show potential, and you've got it. Don't waste that gift." After basic training, I was assigned Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division. The base was massive, bustling with soldiers and civilians, helicopters and Humvees, a small city dedicated to the business of national defense. I was assigned to the 86th Combat Support Hospital as a medic, responsible for everything from routine sick call to trauma response. My supervising physician was Captain Sarah Mitchell, a career Army doctor who had served in Iraq during the surge. She was tough, brilliant, and completely uninterested in anything but competence. "Santos, you've got good hands and a calm head," she told me after my first month. "Those are the two most important qualities in a medic. Everything else can be taught." Under her mentorship, I thrived in ways I never had before. I learned to start IVs on dehydrated soldiers, treat combat injuries during training exercises, and manage medical supplies for a unit of 300 people. When soldiers came to me with problems, they weren't comparing me to someone else or questioning my qualifications. They just needed help, and I could provide it. The sense of purpose was intoxicating. Every day, I made a tangible difference in people's lives. When Private Martinez dislocated his shoulder during a training jump, I got him stabilized and transported to proper care. When Specialist Johnson had an allergic reaction to new medication, I caught it early and potentially saved her life. When Sergeant Foster struggled with depression after his divorce, I connected him with mental health resources and checked on him regularly until he stabilized. "You've got a calling for this work," Captain Mitchell observed during one of our monthly evaluations. "Have you considered applying for the Army's Position Assistant Program? You'd make an excellent PA." I had never imagined myself in advanced medical training, but the possibility excited me in ways that surprised me. I could envision a future where my skills and knowledge grew, where I could take on greater responsibilities and help people at a higher level. My first deployment came 18 months later. Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Shank, Logar Province. The landscape was brutal and beautiful. Mountains that scraped the sky, valleys that seemed to go on forever, and an underlying tension that never completely left your shoulders. As a combat medic attached to an infantry unit, my job was to keep soldiers healthy and alive in one of the most dangerous environments in the world. I treated everything from minor injuries to gunshot wounds to heat exhaustion to IED blast injuries. The work was intense, meaningful, and terrifying in the best way possible. My unit commander, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared name, was a thoughtful leader who understood that taking care of his soldiers meant more than just tactical considerations. "Santos, your medical readiness reports are consistently excellent," he told me during my mid-tour evaluation. "Your soldiers trust you, and trust is everything out here. How are you holding up personally?" It was a question my family had never asked with such genuine concern.
I'm doing well, sir. This is exactly the work I want to be doing. He nodded approvingly. Good, because I'm recommending you for promotion and considering you for selection as senior medic for the next deployment cycle.
The recognition felt earned in a way that nothing in my civilian life ever had. I wasn't being promoted because someone felt sorry for me or because I had sacrificed enough to deserve it. I was being recognized because I was good at my job and had proven myself under pressure. My second deployment came 2 years later, to a more remote outpost in Helmand province. The conditions were harsher, the mission more dangerous, and the medical challenges more complex. I was now a senior medic, responsible for training younger soldiers and managing advanced medical protocols. The day that changed everything started like any other. March 15th, 2019, a routine patrol through a village where we had been building relationships with local leaders. I was riding in the second vehicle, reviewing medical supplies and chatting with Corporal Davidson about his upcoming leave. The IED was buried in a pothole that we had driven through dozens of times before. The explosion lifted our vehicle 3 feet in the air and sent it crashing back down on its side. The sound was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not just loud, but a physical force that seemed to compress my entire body. When I regained consciousness, I was hanging upside down in my harness, blood running from my ears, and the left side of my head feeling like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. Around me, my fellow soldiers were moaning, crying, calling for help. Training kicked in despite my own injuries. I unclipped my harness, assessed my ability to function, vision unclear but present, left arm painful but mobile, legs working, and began triaging the other soldiers in our vehicle. Davidson had a compound fracture of his left leg and was going into shock. Specialist Williams had facial lacerations and a possible concussion. Staff Sergeant Anderson was unconscious with unknown internal injuries. "Santos, talk to me." Captain Mitchell's voice came through my radio, which had somehow survived the blast. 3 casualties, 1 critical, 2 stable. I managed to report while applying pressure to Davidson's bleeding. I'm functional, but hearing compromised. The next hour was a blur of medical procedures performed while under fire from insurgents who had been waiting for our response to the IED. I stabilized Davidson's leg, monitored Williams for signs of brain injury, and kept Anderson's airway clear until the medevac helicopter arrived. It wasn't until I was in the field hospital that anyone realized the extent of my own injuries. The blast had ruptured my left eardrum, caused significant hearing damage, and given me a traumatic brain injury that would affect my balance, memory, and ability to process multiple stimuli simultaneously. "You probably saved Davidson's life," Captain Mitchell told me as I lay in the hospital bed, trying to process the doctor's explanation of my injuries. "And you did it while suffering a serious brain injury yourself." But the praise felt hollow when I learned what the injuries meant for my career. The hearing damage was permanent. I would need hearing aids for the rest of my life. The TBI symptoms might improve with time and therapy, but they made me unsuitable for combat deployment. "I'm recommending you for a Bronze Star for your actions," Captain Mitchell continued, "and the medical board will likely recommend medical retirement with full benefits." Medical retirement. At 25 years old, my military career was over before I had really figured out what I wanted to do with it. The flight home was surreal. I was traveling as a wounded warrior, with special accommodations and priority boarding, but I felt more like I was fleeing from something unfinished. My hearing aids were new and uncomfortable, the world sounded muffled and artificial, and I kept having moments of dizziness that made me grab for handholds that weren't there. My family met me at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport with balloons and a banner that read, "Welcome home, hero." The gesture was thoughtful, but it felt like they were celebrating someone else's homecoming. I wasn't a hero. I was a medic who had done my job and paid a price for it. The life insurance payout was processed 6 months after my medical retirement. part of a benefits package designed to compensate soldiers for service-connected disabilities. $100,000 seemed like an enormous amount of money until I started researching the long-term costs of my injuries: ongoing therapy, specialized hearing aids, potential cognitive rehabilitation. But it also represented possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I had resources that could help me build something meaningful. I researched nonprofits that served veterans, looked into graduate programs in counseling or social work, and started dreaming about ways I could use my experience to help other soldiers transition back to civilian life. I moved to San Diego partly for the weather. My TBI symptoms were worse in extreme temperatures, and partly for the distance from my family's expectations. I found a small apartment, started seeing Riley Thompson at the VA for therapy, and began planning my future. That future was going to be built around service, just like my military career had been. But this time, I would be serving veterans who were struggling with the same challenges I faced every day. The invisible wounds that didn't show up in photographs, but changed everything about how you moved through the world. The $100,000 was my seed funding, my chance to turn my pain into purpose. Until my family decided that Sophia's wedding was more important than my recovery.
The pressure campaign began within hours of that devastating phone call. After I hung up on my father, my phone started buzzing with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, each one delivering the same carefully coordinated message. Family comes first, Sophia needs support, and I was being selfish. My Aunt Rosa, my father's older sister, was the first to text. "Mija, your mother called me crying. How can you break your sister's heart like this? She's been dreaming of this wedding since she was little." Then came my cousin Elena from Tucson. "Maria, I know you've been through a lot, but family is forever. Houses are hard to find right now. Please reconsider." Even my grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. Herrera, had somehow been enlisted. "Your abuela is so worried about the family being divided. She says you were always the responsible one." The message was clear and consistent. Everyone who mattered in my extended family had been briefed on the situation and was expected to help bring me back in line. It was a classic Santos family maneuver. When direct pressure failed, Dad would activate his network of relatives to create an overwhelming chorus of disapproval. But the most painful message came from my grandmother herself, Abuela Carmen, the one person in my family who had always seemed to see me as more than just Sophia's older sister. "Maria, mi amor, please call me. Your father says you won't help Sophia with her house, but I know there must be more to this story. I want to hear your side." The text brought tears to my eyes because it was the only one that acknowledged I might have legitimate reasons for my decision. Abuela Carmen had always been different from the rest of my father's family. Gentler, more thoughtful, less quick to judge. If anyone could understand my position, it would be her. I called her that evening, after spending the day at the Veterans Center trying to focus on work while my phone buzzed constantly with increasingly urgent family messages. "Abuela, it's Maria." "Ay, mija, thank God you called. I've been so worried about you." Her voice carried the warmth that had comforted me throughout my childhood. "Your father tells me you won't help your sister, but that doesn't sound like the Maria I know." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "Abuela, it's not that simple. This money isn't just extra cash I have lying around. It's compensation for my injuries, and I have plans for it." "Tell me about these plans, mi amor." For the next 20 minutes, I explained my vision for the veteran nonprofit, how I wanted to create a center that would help former soldiers transition to civilian life, offering everything from job training to mental health support to financial counseling. I told her about the veterans I met at the VA who were struggling with homelessness, addiction, and suicide because they couldn't find their place in the civilian world. "This sounds like important work," she said quietly when I finished. "Work that honors your service." "It is, abuela. This isn't me being selfish, it's me trying to turn my experience into something that helps other people." There was a long pause. "And your parents don't understand this. They think Sophia's wedding is more important.
They think because I'm single and don't have immediate plans to buy a house, I don't need the money as much as she does. Another pause, longer this time. Maria, can I tell you something about your grandfather? My grandfather had died when I was 12, but I remembered him as a quiet man who worked construction and always had peppermints in his shirt pocket. When your father was young, maybe 22, he wanted to expand the auto shop. He had big dreams, wanted to buy the building next door, hire more mechanics, maybe start selling cars too. But his brother Miguel, your Tío Miguel, was getting married and needed money for a house. I had heard references to my uncle's wedding, but never in this context. Your grandfather made your father give Miguel all his expansion money. Family first, he said. The business can wait. Her voice grew sad. Your father never got another chance like that. The property was sold to someone else, and by the time he had saved enough money again, the neighborhood had changed. The story hit me like a physical blow. I could see the pattern extending back through generations. The family member with dreams, sacrificing for the family member with immediate needs. Does Dad know you're telling me this? Your father has forgotten many things about being young and having dreams, she said carefully. Sometimes people who have had to sacrifice expect others to sacrifice too. It makes their own pain feel worthwhile. But, Abuela, what about what I want? What about my dreams? Mija, you are asking the right questions. I just wish I had been brave enough to ask them when I was your age. The conversation gave me strength, but it also intensified the family pressure. Word apparently got back to my father that his mother wasn't delivering the expected message of compliance because the campaign escalated dramatically over the next week. Sophia started calling me daily, sometimes multiple times a day, alternating between tears and anger with theatrical precision. Sophia, you don't understand how stressed I am, she sobbed during a particularly dramatic call. Miguel's parents are asking questions about why we can't afford a decent house. I'm embarrassed to tell them that my own sister won't help me. Sophia, have you explained to Miguel's parents that you're expecting me to give you my military disability compensation? It's not disability money, it's life insurance, and you're not disabled. You just have hearing problems. The casual dismissal of my TBI, my PTSD, and the chronic pain that I dealt with daily was breathtaking in its ignorance. I have a traumatic brain injury, Sophia. I have nightmares. I can't handle crowds or loud noises. This isn't just hearing problems. Well, you seem fine when I talk to you. It was like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen. Sophia had no framework for understanding invisible injuries because her entire life had been built around problems that could be fixed with money, attention, or family intervention. My mother took a different approach, focusing on guilt and family obligation. Your sister has been planning this wedding for 2 years, she said during one of her daily check-in calls. She's already put deposits down on the venue, the caterer, the photographer. If she can't buy this house, she'll have to postpone everything. Mom, those are choices Sophia made. I didn't agree to fund her wedding or her house. But family helps family, Maria. When you were in the hospital in Germany, who do you think paid for my plane ticket to come see you? When you needed help transitioning back to civilian life, who helped you find your apartment? The manipulation was expertly crafted, mixing legitimate family support with false equivalencies. Yes, my mother had visited me in the military hospital, but that visit had lasted 3 days and consisted mainly of her worrying aloud about how my injuries would affect my future marriage prospects. And the apartment hunting help had been a few phone calls to rental agencies, hardly comparable to handing over $50,000. But the most insidious pressure came from my father, who had shifted from anger to disappointment, a much more effective weapon in his emotional arsenal. I raised you to be better than this, he said, during a call that came while I was grocery shopping, forcing me to step outside the store to avoid having a breakdown in the cereal aisle. The Maria I raised would never abandon her family when they needed her most.
I'm not abandoning anyone, Dad. I'm making a responsible decision about my own money. Your money? That money exists because this family raised you with values and character. You learned discipline and service from us. Without that foundation, you never would have succeeded in the military. It was a masterful reframing. My military service and the compensation for my injuries were somehow the result of his parenting, making him a stakeholder in money that had been earned through my blood and sacrifice. The emotional assault was relentless and coordinated. If I didn't answer Sophia's calls, my mother would call to tell me how much I was hurting my sister. If I didn't respond to my father's text, my aunt would message me about family loyalty. If I tried to explain my position to anyone, they would redirect the conversation back to Sophia's needs and my supposed selfishness. The worst part was how familiar the tactics felt. This was the same playbook that had been used throughout my childhood whenever I tried to assert my own needs or priorities. The family would mobilize as a unit, overwhelming me with guilt, obligation, and threats of exclusion until I capitulated. But there was a crucial difference this time. I was no longer a dependent child living under my parents' roof. I was a combat veteran with my own income, my own apartment, and my own support system. The threats of being cut off from family resources didn't carry the same weight they once had because I had already built a life independent of their support. More importantly, I had a mission that felt bigger than family politics. Every day at the Veterans Center, I saw former soldiers who were struggling with challenges that $100,000 could help address. Every therapy session with Riley reminded me that healing was possible when you had the right resources and support. I wasn't just protecting my money, I was protecting my purpose. But the pressure was taking its toll. I was having trouble sleeping, my appetite was poor, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for the next wave of family messages. Riley noticed the change during our weekly session. "How are you handling the family situation?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I'm standing firm on my decision, but it's exhausting. They're not going to give up easily." "Good for you for holding your boundaries. That takes tremendous strength, especially with family. But I'm concerned about the stress this is causing you." She was right to be concerned. The campaign to change my mind was affecting my physical health, my job performance, and my overall well-being. But I knew that caving to the pressure would be worse. It would reinforce the family dynamic that had controlled my life for 26 years and destroy my chance to build something meaningful from my military experience. The final escalation came 2 weeks after the initial phone call, when my father played his trump card.
I was at work reviewing case files for veterans applying for emergency housing assistance when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Usually I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Maria?" The voice was unfamiliar, an older woman, shaky and emotional. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Dr. Patricia Gutierrez from Desert Regional Medical Center in Phoenix. I'm calling about your father, Vincent Santos. He's listed you as an emergency contact." My heart stopped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's stable now, but he was brought in about 2 hours ago with chest pain and elevated blood pressure. He's in our cardiac unit undergoing tests." The world tilted sideways. Whatever anger I felt toward my father, whatever boundaries I was trying to maintain, disappeared in the face of the possibility that I might lose him. "I'm in San Diego. How quickly can I get there?" "The next few hours are critical for monitoring, but he's not in immediate danger," Dr. Gutierrez said carefully. "He's been asking for you repeatedly. He seems very anxious about something called family business that needs resolving." Of course. Even from a hospital bed, my father was orchestrating family drama. I called my supervisor to request emergency leave and booked the next flight to Phoenix
my hands shaking as I entered my credit card information. During the 2-hour flight, I tried to prepare myself for whatever I would find. Heart problems ran in my father's family. His own father had died from a massive heart attack at 62. Despite our conflicts, the thought of losing Dad filled me with a grief I wasn't prepared for. My mother met me at the hospital, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. She fell into my arms in the waiting area, and for a moment, we were just a mother and daughter dealing with a medical crisis, not adversaries in a family conflict. "How is he really?" I asked, holding her while she cried. "The doctors say it wasn't a full heart attack, but his blood pressure was dangerously high, and there are signs of stress on his heart. They're keeping him for observation and running more tests." We sat together in the uncomfortable hospital chairs, surrounded by the familiar smell of disinfectant and the quiet beeping of medical equipment. It reminded me too much of my own time as a patient. The vulnerability of being at the mercy of machines and medical professionals. "Maria," Mom said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "The chest pain started during a phone call with the bank." "What kind of phone call?" She was quiet for a long moment. "He was trying to get a loan to help Sophia with the house. The business has been struggling since the pandemic, and our credit isn't what it used to be. The bank turned him down." The pieces clicked into place. My father's desperation to get my insurance money wasn't just about family favoritism. It was about financial pressure I hadn't been aware of. The auto shop that had been his pride and joy was apparently failing, and he couldn't bear to disappoint Sophia the way he had been disappointed by life. "Mom, why didn't you tell me the business was in trouble?" "Your father is proud. He didn't want anyone to know, especially after you had already been through so much with your injuries." She looked up at me with tired eyes. "But when Sophia started crying about the house and Miguel's parents started asking questions about the wedding expenses, your father felt like he was failing everyone." The manipulation was even more complex than I had realized. My father wasn't just trying to control my money, he was trying to solve multiple financial problems by using my insurance payout as a magic solution. Sophia's house, his business debt, his reputation as a provider, all of it hinged on my willingness to sacrifice my own plans. A nurse appeared to tell us we could see him, 2 at a time for 15 minutes. Walking into his room, I was shocked by how small and vulnerable he looked connected to monitors and IVs. This was the man who had seemed invincible throughout my childhood, reduced to a patient in a hospital gown. "Maria," he said, his voice hoarse, "you came." "Of course I came, Dad. You're in the hospital." He reached for my hand with surprising strength. "I need to talk to you about the money, about Sophia." "Dad, you need to rest. We can talk about family stuff later." "No, listen to me." His grip tightened. "I may not get another chance to make this right. The business is failing, Maria. I'm probably going to lose the shop within the year unless something changes." The admission was clearly painful for him. Vincent Santos, who had built his identity around being a successful provider, was acknowledging that his life's work was crumbling. "I can't help with business expenses, Dad. That's not what this money is for." "I'm not asking you to save the shop. I'm asking you to save your sister's future. If she can't afford this house, if she has to postpone the wedding, Miguel's parents will think we can't provide for our daughter. It will humiliate her." Even from a hospital bed, facing his own mortality and the failure of his business, my father's primary concern was preserving Sophia's image and his own reputation as a capable patriarch. "Dad, Sophia is 23 years old. She can get a job, save money, take out a mortgage like everyone else. This isn't the end of the world."
His face flushed despite his weakness. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Your mother cries every night because Sophia is so upset. The whole family is watching to see if I can take care of my responsibilities." "What about your responsibility to me? What about supporting the daughter who served her country and came home with permanent injuries?"
You're strong. You always have been. You don't need the same kind of help Sophia does. There it was again, the fundamental assumption that had shaped my entire life. Maria is strong, so Maria doesn't need support. Maria is practical, so Maria's dreams don't matter. Maria is independent, so Maria can handle disappointment and sacrifice. Being strong doesn't mean I don't deserve consideration, Dad. It doesn't mean my plans and goals are less important than Sophia's. He closed his eyes, looking exhausted. If something happens to me, will you be able to live with knowing you could have helped your family and chose not to? The emotional manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. From a heart cardiac unit, my father was essentially arguing that my refusal to fund Sophia's house might kill him, making me responsible for his death if his heart condition worsened. But I had seen this tactic before in different forms. When I was 16 and wanted to attend a summer program for gifted students, Dad had developed mysterious chest pains that coincidentally resolved when I agreed to stay home and work at the auto shop instead. When I was applying to colleges, Mom had suffered from debilitating headaches that only improved when I committed to staying close to home at ASU. My family had weaponized their own health and emotional well-being to control my choices for years. The hospital setting made it more dramatic, but the underlying strategy was the same. Dad, I love you and I want you to recover fully, but I'm not going to make financial decisions based on emotional blackmail. His eyes snapped open, anger overriding weakness. Emotional blackmail? I'm your father, lying in a hospital bed, asking for help supporting your sister's future, and you call it blackmail? I call it what it is. You're using your health crisis to pressure me into giving up money that represents my own future and recovery. My mother, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Maria, please. He's been so stressed about money, about the family. If you could just help with part of the house payment. Mom, stop. Both of you, just stop. I stood up, feeling dizzy with the weight of 26 years of accumulated resentment and boundary violations. I am not responsible for Dad's business problems. I am not responsible for Sophia's wedding timeline. I am not responsible for managing everyone else's emotions and expectations. You are responsible to this family, Dad said, his voice getting stronger as his anger grew. Everything you have, everything you've achieved started with the foundation we gave you. And everything I've lost, everything I've sacrificed has been for this family's benefit. When does it end, Dad? When do I get to make choices based on my own needs and goals? The heart monitor started beeping faster as his blood pressure rose. A nurse appeared immediately, checking his vitals and giving me a warning look. Sir, you need to stay calm. This kind of stress is exactly what we're trying to avoid. My father looked at the nurse, then at me. See what you're doing to me? This argument is literally affecting my heart. It was masterful manipulation, using the medical equipment to make his emotional pressure visible and quantifiable. But I had spent 2 years in therapy learning to recognize these patterns, and I wasn't going to be gaslit into believing that my reasonable boundaries were life-threatening to anyone. I'm going to step outside so you can rest, I said quietly. When you're feeling better, we can continue this conversation without trying to guilt me into financial decisions. If you walk out of this room without agreeing to help your sister, you're walking out of this family, he said, his voice cold despite the hospital setting. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. My mother looked shocked. Apparently, even she hadn't expected him to escalate to complete disownment while connected to a heart monitor. That's your choice to make, Dad, but it won't change my decision about the money. I walked out of the room, past the concerned nurse, past my crying mother, past the weight of 26 years of family expectations. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and let myself cry for everything I was losing and everything I was finally choosing to save. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Dad's in the hospital because of your selfishness. Hope you can live with yourself. I turned off my phone and walked toward the elevator. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own future
over my family's approval. And it felt like dying and being reborn at the same time.
I flew back to San Diego that same night, leaving my father in the cardiac unit and my mother in the waiting room. The flight attendant asked if I was okay after seeing my tear-stained face, and I realized I didn't know how to answer that question. I was devastated and liberated, grief-stricken and hopeful, all at the same time. My apartment felt different when I walked in, smaller somehow, but also more definitively mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely cut off from my family of origin. No safety net, no financial backup, no one to call when things got difficult. It was terrifying and strangely peaceful. The first few days were the hardest. My father recovered from his cardiac episode. It had been stress-induced chest pain rather than an actual heart attack, but none of my family members called to update me. I learned about his condition through a Facebook post from my cousin Elena, who apparently felt comfortable enough to share family medical information publicly, but not to text me directly. "So grateful that Uncle Vincent is feeling better and will be home tomorrow," her post read. "Family is everything, especially during times like these. Some people forget that. Prayers and broken hearts." The passive-aggressive social media campaign was almost impressive in its pettiness. Over the next week, various family members posted cryptic messages about loyalty, sacrifice, and the importance of putting family first. Sophia posted a photo of herself crying in her wedding dress with the caption, "Sometimes the people you love most disappoint you the worst, but wedding planning continues." I blocked them all. Derek Chen, my friend from the Veteran Center, noticed the change in me immediately when I returned to work. "You look like you've been through a war," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with his usual directness. Derek was a Navy veteran who had lost his left leg to an IED in Iraq and now worked as a peer counselor for newly discharged veterans. We had bonded over our shared experience of invisible injuries. His phantom limb pain and my TBI symptoms were equally real and equally invisible to most people. My family and I had a falling out. "Must have been some falling out. You look like you haven't slept in a week." I gave him the abbreviated version of the story, focusing on the financial demand and the ultimatum rather than the emotional complexity of cutting ties with everyone I had grown up with. "Jesus, Maria. They wanted your entire life insurance payout for your sister's house?" His outrage was validating, in a way my family's criticism never had been. "That's not family loyalty, that's financial abuse." The term hit me like a slap. I had thought about emotional manipulation and unfair expectations, but I hadn't framed what was happening as abuse. Derek, who had experience with family dysfunction from his own childhood, saw it clearly in a way I was still learning to. "The thing is, I keep second-guessing myself," I admitted. "What if I really am being selfish? What if this is just normal family expectations and I'm too damaged from the military stuff to handle it appropriately?" "Stop right there," Derek said firmly. "I've known you for 8 months. You're one of the most generous people I've ever met. You've stayed late to help veterans with their paperwork. You've driven people to medical appointments on your own time. You've shared your lunch more times than I can count. You're not selfish. You're just finally setting boundaries." His perspective helped, but the practical challenges of my new independence were daunting. Without the possibility of family support in emergencies, I needed to build a more substantial financial safety net. I started working overtime at the Veteran Center and picked up freelance work translating documents from Spanish to English, a skill I had developed during my deployments. The extra work was exhausting, especially with my TBI symptoms, making it difficult to concentrate for long periods. But it was also empowering. Every dollar I earned was mine to allocate according to my own priorities and values. I found a new apartment, smaller and less expensive than my current place, in a complex that catered to graduate students and young professionals. The rent was $400 less per month, and the savings would add up significantly over time. My new roommate was Jessica Martinez, a social work student at UC San Diego who is completing her practicum at a homeless shelter. "She's hardly ever home except to sleep and study," she warned me during our phone interview. "But I'm clean, quiet, and I always pay my bills on time." Perfect! I work a lot too, and I have some noise sensitivity issues from a brain injury, so quiet is actually ideal. Moving day was bittersweet. Derek helped me load my minimal possessions into a borrowed pickup truck, and I realized how little I actually owned. My life fit into a dozen boxes and 3 suitcases. Clothes, books, a few kitchen items, my computer, and medical equipment. "This is it?" Derek asked, looking around my nearly empty apartment. "I travel light," I said, trying to make a joke of it. But the truth was that I had never accumulated much because I had always expected to be temporarily wherever I was. Military training, family expectations, and financial constraints had taught me not to get too attached to places or things.
The new apartment was in a neighborhood I couldn't have afforded on my own, but splitting expenses with Jessica made it workable. My room was small but bright, with a window that faced west toward the ocean. I could hear the distant sound of waves if I opened the window at night, a sound that helped mask the tinnitus in my damaged ear. Jessica turned out to be an ideal roommate, respectful of my need for quiet, understanding about my medical appointments, and surprisingly insightful about trauma recovery due to her social work training. You know, a lot of the clients I work with have stories about family systems that don't support their healing, she said one evening while we shared takeout Chinese food at our small kitchen table. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the least equipped to handle our growth. Her observation resonated deeply. My family's love had always been conditional on my willingness to remain in a supporting role, managing their emotions and sacrificing my own needs. When I had tried to grow beyond that role, their support had disappeared. The financial pressure of supporting myself completely was real and constant. After rent, utilities, groceries, car payment, insurance, student loans, and medical expenses, I had very little left over each month. The $100,000 life insurance payout sat in a separate savings account, untouched, but constantly on my mind as both my future and my security blanket. I started researching the nonprofit I wanted to create with obsessive focus. Every evening after work, I would sit at my laptop learning about business registration, tax-exempt status, grant writing, and program development. The project gave me purpose during the loneliest periods of adjusting to my new independence. My vision was becoming clearer with each day of research. I wanted to create a transition center that would address the practical and emotional challenges veterans faced when leaving military service. Housing assistance, job training, mental health support, financial counseling, all the services I had wished were available when I was struggling to adapt to civilian life. The preliminary budget I developed showed that $100,000 could fund the first year of operations for a small center, covering startup costs, initial staff salaries, and program materials. It wouldn't be lavish, but it would be real and potentially life-saving for veterans who had nowhere else to turn. During one of my therapy sessions with Riley, I talked about the growing clarity I felt about my mission. "It sounds like cutting ties with your family, as painful as it's been, has given you space to really focus on what matters to you," she observed. "I think so. For the first time in my life, I'm making decisions based entirely on my own values and goals instead of trying to manage everyone else's reactions. How does that feel?" "Scary. Lonely sometimes, but also free, I guess. Like I can breathe deeper than I have in years." Riley nodded approvingly. "That's what healthy boundaries feel like. Difficult at first, but ultimately liberating." 3 months into my new life, I received an unexpected text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Miguel, Sophia's fiancé. Can we talk? There are things about your family situation that you should know." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. Miguel had always seemed like a nice enough guy, but he was firmly in Sophia's camp and presumably supportive of the campaign to get my money. "What kind of things?" I texted back. "Things about the house, the wedding expenses, and your father's business that don't match what your family has been telling everyone. I think you deserve to know the truth." My hands were shaking as I read his response. After months of being painted as the selfish family member who had abandoned their relatives in their time of need, someone was suggesting that the story I had been told wasn't complete. "Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow afternoon? There's a place called Ocean View Cafe on Sunset Boulevard in Pacific Beach. 3 p.m.? I'll be there. Thank you for being willing to listen."
I spent the rest of that evening wondering what Miguel could possibly tell me that would change anything about my decision. I'd made peace with being cut off from my family, had built a life that didn't depend on their approval, and was moving forward with plans that honored my own values. But some part of me still craved vindication, still hoped for evidence that my choice had been not just right for me, but objectively justified by circumstances I hadn't been aware of. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a corner table where I could see the entrance. When Miguel walked in, looking nervous and checking over his shoulder like he was worried about being followed, I knew this conversation was going to change everything I thought I understood about my family's financial crisis.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Miguel ordered black coffee and sat down across from me, his usual easy smile replaced by a look of troubled concern. I had always liked Sophia's fiancé. He was steady, kind, and seemed to genuinely adore my sister despite her dramatic tendencies. But seeing him here, clearly uncomfortable about betraying family secrets, made me realize how serious whatever he had to tell me must be. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. "I wasn't sure you'd be willing to talk to anyone connected to your family right now." "I'm curious about what you think I should know," I replied carefully. "But before we start, I need to be clear. I'm not changing my mind about the money. Whatever you're about to tell me, my decision stands." He nodded quickly. "I'm not here to convince you to give Sophia money. Actually, I'm here because I think you should know that the whole situation has been misrepresented." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Miguel took a deep breath. "The house Sophia fell in love with, the one she supposedly needs $50,000 to buy, we can afford it without your money. We qualified for the mortgage 3 weeks ago, and we already put down our own deposit." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "We saved up $30,000 for a down payment over the past 2 years. Between my tech job and Sophia's part-time work at the boutique, we make decent money. We're not wealthy, but we're not desperate either." I stared at him, trying to process this information. "Then why?" "Because your father convinced Sophia that asking for your money was the responsible thing to do. He said it would be foolish to use our savings when family money was available, and that it would be better to keep our savings as an emergency fund." The manipulation was even more calculated than I had realized. My family hadn't just demanded my insurance money for an urgent need. They had demanded it for convenience, to avoid Sophia and Miguel having to use their own resources. "Does your mother know about the cryptocurrency losses?" "I don't think so. From what Sophia has told me, your father keeps the business finances separate, and your mother doesn't ask detailed questions about money as long as their personal bills get paid." I thought about my mother's tearful calls, her genuine worry about family harmony, her belief that she was trying to hold the family together during a legitimate crisis. She had been manipulated as much as I had, just in a different way. "Miguel, why are you telling me all this? You're about to marry into this family. This can't be easy for you." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Because what they did to you was wrong, and because I'm starting to understand how your family operates. Ever since we got engaged, I've been watching how they treat you compared to how they treat Sophia, and it's not right." His observation was surprisingly validating. As an outsider marrying into the family, Miguel had a perspective on our dynamics that none of us could see clearly. "Plus," he continued, "I love Sophia, but I don't love the entitled attitude she's developed about money and family support. If we're going to have a healthy marriage, she needs to learn that we can't just expect other people to solve our problems for us." "How is she handling your refusal to go along with the family pressure?" "Not well. She keeps saying that you're being selfish and that I should be more supportive of family loyalty. But I grew up in a family where everyone was expected to take care of themselves first, then help others if they could. This idea that you should sacrifice your future for someone else's convenience doesn't make sense to me. I felt a wave of gratitude toward this man who was willing to risk conflict with his fiancée to tell me the truth. Thank you for being honest with me. This helps me understand what really happened. There's one more thing you should know, Miguel said hesitantly. Your father has been talking about taking out a loan against your grandmother's house to cover his business debts. What? Abuela Carmen's house? She co-signed something for him years ago, and apparently he still has some legal claim to the property. He's been researching home equity loans using her house as collateral. The thought of my elderly grandmother losing her home because of my father's financial irresponsibility was horrifying. Abuela Carmen had lived in that small house for 40 years, had raised her children there, had planned to live out her remaining years surrounded by familiar memories. Does she know? I don't think so, but Sophia mentioned it because she was worried about where your grandmother would live if something happened to the house. I felt a surge of protective anger. My grandmother had been the only family member to show genuine concern for my perspective during this crisis, and now she was potentially at risk because of the same financial recklessness that had led to demands for my money. Miguel, would you be willing to go with me to visit my grandmother? I think she needs to know what's going on. Sophia would kill me if she found out. Sophia will kill you anyway if your grandmother loses her house and finds out you knew about it beforehand. He considered this, then nodded slowly. You're right. When do you want to go? We made plans to drive to Phoenix the following weekend. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Miguel touched my arm gently. Maria, for what it's worth, I think you made the right decision about the money. What you're planning with the veteran nonprofit sounds important, and you shouldn't have to give up your dreams to enable other people's poor choices. His words meant more than he could possibly know. After months of being told I was selfish, ungrateful, and wrong, having someone validate my decision, especially someone who had no reason to take my side, felt like emotional salvation. That evening, I called the one person I had been too proud to contact since leaving Phoenix, Captain Sarah Mitchell, my former supervising physician who now worked for a veteran services organization in Denver. Santos, I was wondering when you'd call, she said, her voice carrying the same authoritative warmth I remembered from our Army days. I heard through the grapevine that you were having some family troubles. I filled her in on the entire situation, the money demand, the family pressure, my decision to cut ties, and my plans for starting a nonprofit. You know what this sounds like to me? She said when I finished. It sounds like you finally learned to apply the same courage to your personal life that you showed in combat. Standing up to family manipulation takes the same kind of strength as standing up to enemy fire. It doesn't feel courageous. It feels isolating and scary. The best courage usually does. But Maria, what you're describing, a family that only values you for what you can sacrifice, that's not love. That's exploitation. You did the right thing by refusing to participate. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Actually, I have some news that might interest you. There's a Veteran Services Conference in Los Angeles next month, focused specifically on innovative approaches to transition support. They're looking for veterans with first-hand experience of the challenges to speak on a panel about emerging needs. Interested? The opportunity was exactly what I needed to advance my nonprofit plans. Networking with established organizations, learning from successful programs, and building credibility in the veteran services community. Absolutely. Send me the details. Consider it done. And Maria, I'm proud of you for choosing your mission over family pressure. The veterans you'll eventually serve are lucky to have someone who understands the cost of standing up for what's right. After we hung up, I sat in my small bedroom looking out at the Pacific Ocean sunset, feeling more hopeful than I had in months. I was building a support network of people who valued me for who I was becoming, not who I had always been. People who understood that sometimes love means letting someone grow, even if that growth takes them away from you. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Beer and terrible movies at my place Friday night? I'm buying if you're crying. I laughed out loud for the first time in weeks and texted back, deal, but I get to pick the terrible movie. I was learning that family isn't just about biology, it's about people who show up for you without expecting you to diminish yourself in return. The drive to Phoenix with Miguel felt like stepping back into a previous life. As we crossed the Arizona state line, the familiar desert landscape brought back a flood of memories. Some good, most complicated. Miguel had insisted on driving, partly because he knew the route better, and partly because he could see how nervous I was about confronting my family's lies directly. You know, I've been thinking about what you told me about your nonprofit idea, he said as we passed the exit for Tucson. My company has a community outreach program that provides grants to local nonprofits. Once you get your 501c3 status, I might be able to help you apply for funding. The offer was unexpected and generous. You'd do that? Maria, what you went through in the military, what you're going through now with your family, it's given you a perspective that could help a lot of people. I believe in what you're trying to build. It struck me that Miguel knew more about my actual plans and dreams than anyone in my biological family. He had listened when I explained my vision for veteran services, had asked thoughtful questions about implementation, had treated my goals as legitimate and worthy of support. We arrived at my grandmother's house on a Saturday afternoon. The small adobe home looked exactly as it always had, desert roses blooming in the front yard, wind chimes singing on the covered porch, the American flag my grandfather had hung still flying from its pole by the front door. Abuela Carmen answered our knock with surprise and delight. At 82, she was still sharp, energetic, and fiercely independent. She had always been my refuge in the Santos family chaos, the one person who seemed to see me clearly and love me unconditionally. "Maria, Miguel, what a wonderful surprise!" she said as she pulled us both into hugs that smelled like cinnamon and Pond's cold cream. "I was just making empanadas. Come in, come in." Her small living room was exactly as I remembered. Family photos covering every surface, her favorite telenovela playing softly on the television, the warm recliner where she spent her afternoons reading mystery novels from the library. "Abuela, we need to talk to you about something important," I said gently after we had settled with coffee and still warm empanadas. Her expression grew serious. "This is about the trouble with your father, isn't it?" Miguel and I exchanged glances. "What do you know about the trouble with Dad?" "More than he thinks I know," she said with a slight smile. "When you get to be my age, people assume you don't understand modern problems, but I understand debt, and I understand pride, and I understand when someone is trying to solve their problems by taking advantage of family." Over the next hour, we learned that my grandmother was far more aware of the family dynamics than anyone had realized. She knew about my father's cryptocurrency losses, had suspected that the pressure on me was about more than just helping Sophia, and had been quietly protecting her own financial interests. "My father came to me 3 months ago asking about a loan against this house," he said, her voice steady but angry. "It was temporary, just until his business recovered. But I've seen what happens when men his age start making desperate financial decisions." "What did you tell him?" "I told him no, of course. This house is paid for, and I'm not going to risk becoming homeless at 82 because my son can't manage money properly." Her voice carried a steel that I had inherited, but rarely heard her use directly. "But he's still pursuing it somehow?" "He thinks because he co-signed the original mortgage 30 years ago, he still has legal rights to the property. He's been talking to lawyers about it." The revelation that my father was actively trying to endanger his elderly mother's housing security to cover his gambling losses was breathtaking in its cruelty. Miguel looked as shocked as I felt. "Abuela, have you talked to a lawyer yourself?" "Next week. I have an appointment with Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson. He's an attorney who specializes in elder law. I want to make sure your father can't touch this house." My grandmother's quiet strength was inspiring and heartbreaking.
At 82, she was having to protect herself from her own son's financial recklessness. "There's something else you should know," she continued. "Your father has been telling people that you stole money from the family, that the life insurance payout should have been shared with everyone." "What?" "He's rewritten the story to make himself look like the victim. According to his version, you're selfish and ungrateful, and your military service was somehow a family investment that should benefit everyone." The reframing was so outrageous it was almost funny. My father had somehow convinced himself and others that my disability compensation was family property, that my traumatic brain injury and hearing loss were sacrifices I had made on behalf of the Santos family rather than in service to my country. "How are you handling all this family drama?" I asked her. She was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took my hand. "Mija, I lived through the Depression, World War II, and raising 4 children on very little money. I've learned that family loyalty goes both ways. Your father has forgotten that."
"I think you made the only decision that protects your future and honors your service," she said firmly. "That money represents your sacrifice and your opportunity to build something meaningful. No one has the right to take that from you." Her validation meant everything to me. This woman who had weathered decades of hardship, who understood both family loyalty and personal responsibility, was telling me that my choice had been right. "I also think," she continued with a mischievous smile, "that it's about time someone in this family stood up to your father's expectation that everyone else should solve his problems." Miguel laughed. "You know, Mrs. Santos, I can see where Maria gets her strength." "She gets it from the women in this family, not the men," Abuela Carmen replied. "The Santos men are good at making noise and expecting other people to clean up their messes. The women are good at surviving." Before we left, my grandmother pulled me aside privately. "Maria, I want you to know that whatever happens with the rest of the family, you will always be welcome in this house. You're the granddaughter who chose service over comfort, who chose integrity over approval. I'm proud of you." She handed me a small wrapped package, early Christmas present. Inside was a silver locket that had belonged to my great-grandmother, a woman who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing and built a life through determination and hard work. "She would have understood what you're doing," Abuela Carmen said. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is refuse to enable their worst behaviors." The drive back to San Diego was quieter than the trip to Phoenix had been. Miguel seemed lost in thought, and I was processing everything we had learned about my family's situation and my grandmother's wisdom. "Can I ask you something?" Miguel said as we stopped for gas outside Tucson. "Of course. Are you ever going to try to reconcile with your parents and Sophia?" I considered the question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe, someday, if they can accept that I'm not responsible for managing their problems and financing their choices. But right now, they see me as either a resource to be exploited or an obstacle to their plans. And you're okay with that?" "I'm learning to be okay with it. The family I'm building now, Derek, Jessica, Captain Mitchell, Riley, even you, these are people who support my growth instead of demanding that I shrink to make them comfortable." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "Sophia is slowly starting to see some of this stuff too. The conversation with your grandmother really opened my eyes to how manipulative your father has been, not just with you, but with everyone. Change is possible, but it has to come from a genuine recognition of the problem, not from me making it easier for them to avoid consequences." As we crossed back into California, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with geographical boundaries. I had faced the truth about my family's manipulation, had my perception validated by people I trusted, and had reaffirmed my commitment to building a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. The Veteran Services Conference that Captain Mitchell had mentioned was just 2 weeks away, and I was more excited about it than I had been about anything in months. I was ready to stop just surviving my family's dysfunction and start thriving in the life I was creating for myself.
The Veterans Services Conference in Los Angeles exceeded every expectation I had. For 3 days, I was surrounded by people who understood the challenges of military transition, who had built successful programs to help veterans, and who treated my ideas with respect and genuine interest. During my panel discussion about emerging needs in veterans services, I spoke about the gap between discharge and successful civilian integration, the period when many veterans struggled with identity, purpose, and practical challenges like employment and housing. My personal experience with TBI, hearing loss, and family dysfunction gave weight to my observations in ways that academic research alone couldn't. After my presentation, I was approached by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the director of a large veteran services nonprofit in San Diego. "Your presentation was powerful," she said, handing me her business card. "We've been looking for someone with your combination of lived experience and program development vision. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership?" The conversation that followed was unlike any professional opportunity I had ever experienced. Dr. Walsh was offering me a position as program coordinator with the flexibility to develop my own nonprofit as a subsidiary organization. It would provide steady income, benefits, and institutional support while allowing me to pursue my vision for comprehensive veteran transition services. The salary would be $65,000 annually, plus health insurance and professional development funding, she explained. And we'd provide office space and administrative support for your nonprofit startup. I left the conference feeling like my life was finally moving in the right direction. The family conflict that had seemed so devastating 6 months earlier had actually freed me to pursue opportunities I never would have considered while trying to manage everyone else's expectations. But the universe apparently had other plans for my peace of mind. I returned home to find 17 missed calls from various family members and a voicemail from my mother that made my blood run cold. "Maria, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened. Sophia and Miguel broke up, and she's saying it's because of you. She found out about his visit to you and your grandmother, and now she's calling off the wedding. Your father is furious, and he's driving to San Diego to talk to you directly. Please call me back immediately." I sat in my car outside my apartment, staring at my phone and trying to process this information. Sophia and Miguel had broken up because he had told me the truth about their financial situation, and now my father was driving 4 hours to San Diego for a confrontation I definitely didn't want to have. I called Miguel first, hoping to understand what had happened. "Maria, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice exhausted. "Sophia found some texts between us about meeting for coffee, and when I tried to explain, everything just exploded." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I thought what your family did to you was wrong, that we didn't actually need your money for the house, and that I couldn't be part of manipulating you anymore." I felt simultaneously grateful for his honesty and guilty about the consequences he was facing. How did she react? "She accused me of caring more about your feelings than hers, said I was choosing your side over family loyalty, and gave me an ultimatum. Apologize to your father and convince them to give them the money or the engagement is off." "And you chose?" "I chose integrity. I can't build a marriage on lies and manipulation, Maria. If Sophia can't understand why what happened to you was wrong, then maybe we're not compatible anyway." His decision was brave and principled, but I knew it was also painful. He had lost his fiancée for standing up for what was right. "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this." "Don't apologize. You didn't create this situation. Your family did. I just wish I had spoken up sooner." After we hung up, I called Derek to give him a heads up about my father's impending arrival. "Want me to be there when he shows up?" Derek offered immediately. No, but thank you. I need to handle this on my own. But maybe be available by phone in case things get ugly? Absolutely. And Maria, remember that you don't owe him an explanation or a debate. You've already made your decision. My father arrived at my apartment at 8 p.m., looking older and more haggard than I had ever seen him. When I opened the door, he pushed past me without invitation, his face flushed with anger. "Look what you've done," he said without preamble. "Your sister's wedding is ruined, Miguel won't talk to any of us, and the whole family is falling apart because of your selfishness." "Hello to you too, Dad. Please, come in," I said with deliberate sarcasm. "Don't get smart with me, Maria. You've caused enough damage." I closed the door and faced him, feeling calmer than I had expected. Months of therapy, the validation from the conference, and the support of my chosen family had given me strength I didn't know I possessed. "I didn't cause anything, Dad. I made a decision about my own money, and you turned it into a family crisis." "Your money? That money exists because we raised you, because we gave you the values that made you a good soldier."
No, that money exists because I was injured in service to my country. It's compensation for permanent disability, not a reward for good parenting. His face grew redder. Everything you are came from this family. Did it? Because looking back at my childhood, what I got from this family was the expectation that I would sacrifice everything for Sophia's benefit. The strength, the resilience, the ability to serve others, I developed those despite family dynamics, not because of them. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Set boundaries? Refuse to fund my sister's lifestyle with my disability compensation? He began pacing around my small living room like a caged animal. You destroyed your sister's engagement. Miguel was a good man, and now he won't have anything to do with us because you poisoned him against the family. Miguel broke up with Sophia because she demanded that he choose between integrity and family loyalty. That's not my fault. That's a consequence of the manipulation and lies you've all been living with. There were no lies. We needed help, and you refused to provide it. Dad, I know about the cryptocurrency losses. I know that Sophia and Miguel could afford their house without my money. I know you've been trying to take out loans against Abuela Carmen's house. The only lies here are the ones you've been telling yourselves and everyone else. For the first time in the conversation, he looked genuinely shocked. Who told you about... Does it matter? The point is that everything I was told about urgent family needs and financial crises was fabricated. You wanted my money because it would be convenient, not because it was necessary. He slumped into my couch, suddenly looking every one of his 61 years. The business is failing, Maria. I'm going to lose everything I've built. I'm sorry about the business, Dad. I really am. But your financial problems aren't my responsibility to solve, especially not with money I received because of combat injuries. So you're just going to let your family struggle? I'm going to let my family experience the natural consequences of their choices. You made risky investments and lost money. Sophia chose to give her fiancé an ultimatum instead of examining her own behavior. Mom chose to enable all of this instead of encouraging honest communication. Those are all choices that adults make, and adults have to live with the results. He was quiet for several minutes, and I could see him processing information that challenged everything he believed about family obligation and parental authority. "What about forgiveness?" he finally asked. "What about giving people second chances?" Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that harmful behavior didn't happen or making it easier for people to continue making poor choices. I forgive you for the pressure campaign and the emotional manipulation, but forgiveness doesn't mean I'm obligated to fund the consequences of your gambling losses. It wasn't gambling, it was an investment opportunity. Dad, cryptocurrency speculation with money you couldn't afford to lose is gambling, no matter what you called it. He stood up abruptly, his anger returning. Fine. Keep your precious money. Build your little nonprofit. But don't expect this family to be here when you realize you need us. I don't expect this family to be here unconditionally. I expect them to be here if and when they can respect my boundaries and support my choices without demanding that I sacrifice my future for their comfort. He walked toward the door, then turned back. You've changed, Maria. The daughter I raised would never have been this cold. I have changed. The daughter you raised was trained to prioritize everyone else's needs above her own. The woman I've become understands that love shouldn't require self-destruction. After he left, I sat alone in my apartment feeling emotionally drained, but oddly peaceful. The confrontation I had dreaded for months had finally happened, and I had survived it with my boundaries intact. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my roommate. Heard raised voices. You okay? I'm bringing ice cream. 20 minutes later, we sat on my couch sharing Ben & Jerry's and talking about family dysfunction, healthy boundaries, and the difference between guilt and genuine responsibility. You know what strikes me about this whole situation, Jessica said thoughtfully? Your family keeps talking about loyalty and obligation, but they never talk about respect or reciprocity. Real relationships require all of those things. She was right. For the first time in my life, I was building relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. And those relationships were teaching me what love actually looked like when it wasn't twisted by manipulation and conditional approval.
2 years have passed since that devastating phone call on a Tuesday morning changed everything. As I sit in the office of Santos Veteran Transition Services, yes, I kept the family name for my nonprofit, but on my own terms, I can hardly recognize the person I was when this journey began. The organization we built is housed in a converted warehouse in downtown San Diego, with Dr. Walsh's nonprofit as our parent organization. We serve about 200 veterans annually, offering everything from job training and mental health support to financial counseling and emergency housing assistance. The $100,000 that my family wanted for a house down payment has been leveraged into over $800,000 in program funding through grants, partnerships, and donations. Derek Chen is now my assistant director, bringing his experience with peer counseling and his gift for cutting through bureaucratic nonsense. Jessica Martinez joined our team after completing her social work degree, specializing in family therapy for veterans dealing with relationship conflicts during transition. Even Miguel, who eventually moved to San Diego after his breakup with Sophia, volunteers with our financial literacy program on weekends. The success of our program has exceeded every projection I made during those early planning sessions in my cramped apartment. Last month, we received a visit from a congressional delegation studying innovative approaches to veteran services, and they're considering our model for national replication. But the most meaningful part of our work isn't the statistics or the recognition. It's the individual stories of transformation that happen every day. Like Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams, who came to us homeless and struggling with alcohol addiction after her discharge. She's now 6 months sober, has her own apartment, and just started a job as a dispatcher for the San Diego Police Department. Or Corporal James Martinez, who was living in his car because he couldn't navigate the VA benefit system after losing both legs to an IED. He's now in permanent supportive housing and working as a peer counselor at the VA hospital. Each success story reminds me why protecting my insurance money was about more than just my own future. It was about honoring the service and sacrifice of every veteran who struggles to find their place in the civilian world. My relationship with my family has evolved in ways I never could have predicted. My father and I speak occasionally now, brief conversations that focus on practical matters rather than emotional manipulation.
The auto shop closed 8 months ago, and he's working as a mechanic for someone else. A humbling experience that seems to have given him perspective on the consequences of poor financial decisions. My mother and I have begun rebuilding our relationship, slowly and carefully. She started seeing a therapist about codependency after my father's business failed, and she had to confront the reality of their financial situation. Our monthly phone calls are still sometimes difficult, but they're honest in ways our conversations never were before. I understand now why you couldn't give Sophia the money, she told me during our last conversation. I see how hard you worked to build something meaningful, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. The validation meant everything to me, especially because it came without any expectation that I should therefore resume my old role as family problem solver. Sophia's journey has been the most complicated. After her breakup with Miguel, she moved back in with our parents and spent several months in what she later described as a, quote, quarter-life crisis, questioning every assumption she had about relationships, money, and family dynamics. She eventually started therapy, got a full-time job as a marketing coordinator, and began learning to manage her own finances and emotional needs. 6 months ago, she reached out to me directly for the first time since the insurance money crisis. I need to apologize to you, she said during an awkward coffee meeting in Phoenix. I never understood how much pressure you were always under to take care of everyone else. I just assumed that was normal because that's all I ever saw. The apology was meaningful, but what impressed me more was her growth since then. She's building a life based on her own efforts rather than family support, and she's in a new relationship with someone who encourages her independence rather than her dependence. Miguel and I have developed an unexpected friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. He's dating someone new, a teacher who appreciates his integrity rather than being threatened by it, and he regularly volunteers at our nonprofit because he believes in the mission. You know what's funny, he said last week while helping set up for our annual fundraising dinner? I thought losing Sophia was the worst thing that could happen to me, but it actually freed me to find someone who supports my growth instead of demanding that I enable dysfunction. My grandmother remains my strongest family supporter and fiercest advocate. At 84, she successfully protected her house from my father's attempt to use it as collateral, and she delights in hearing updates about the nonprofit's progress.
I'm proud that my granddaughter chose service over convenience, she told me during her recent visit to San Diego. You honored your military commitment and your personal values, even when it was difficult. The personal healing has been as significant as the professional success. My PTSD symptoms are manageable now thanks to consistent therapy and a life that feels purposeful rather than reactive. My hearing continues to be impaired, but I've learned to advocate for my needs rather than hiding my limitations out of shame. Riley Thompson, my therapist from the VA, has become both a colleague and a friend. She joined our nonprofit's board of directors and helps train our staff in trauma-informed care approaches. What you've accomplished goes beyond building a successful organization, she observed during one of our board meetings. You've created a model for how trauma survivors can transform their pain into purpose. The transformation extends beyond my immediate circumstances to my understanding of family, love, and obligation. I've learned that healthy families support each member's growth, even when that growth is uncomfortable or inconvenient. I've learned that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, and that setting boundaries is an act of respect for both yourself and others. Most importantly, I've learned that walking away from dysfunction isn't abandonment, it's self-preservation that creates space for healthier relationships to develop. The veterans we serve often struggle with similar issues around family expectations and personal boundaries. Military service creates strong bonds and clear hierarchies, but civilian family relationships require different skills. Negotiation rather than orders, mutual respect rather than rank-based authority. Through our counseling program, I've seen countless veterans learn to apply the courage they showed in combat to the more subtle battles of establishing healthy relationships with partners, parents, and children who don't understand the military experience. Standing up to enemy fire is easier than standing up to family pressure, one Marine veteran told me recently. At least with the enemy, you know they're trying to hurt you. With family, they convince you that hurting yourself is for your own good. His observation perfectly captures the challenge that many of us face, recognizing that love and manipulation can coexist, and that protecting yourself from harm sometimes means disappointing people you care about. As I write this, sitting in my office surrounded by photos of veterans whose lives have been transformed through our programs, I'm filled with gratitude for that painful phone call 2 years ago that changed everything. If my family had accepted my refusal gracefully, if they had supported my vision for the nonprofit, if they had respected my boundaries without forcing a crisis, I might still be trying to balance everyone else's needs while neglecting my own dreams. The crisis forced me to choose between enabling dysfunction and building something meaningful. The choice was painful, but it was also liberating in ways I never could have imagined. Today, I'm not just surviving my military injuries and family trauma, I'm thriving in ways that honor both my service and my potential. I'm building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I'm using my experience to help other veterans navigate similar challenges. Most importantly, I'm living a life that reflects my own values rather than other people's expectations. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is refuse to participate in patterns that harm everyone involved. Sometimes the most courageous choice is the one that disappoints people you love in order to become the person you're meant to be. My insurance money didn't just fund a nonprofit, it purchased my freedom to build a life worth living. And that, it turns out, was priceless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.